Hi, this is Andy. When one of my sons was in elementary school, his good friend Marcus tagged along with his dad on take your child to work day. Okay. Now, when Marcus came home, he asked my son, "Hey, do you know what my dad does for a living?" My son's like, No. What does he do? Marcus's answer, he goes to meetings. Can you relate? I mean, it feels true for all of us, but especially for those of us who lead teams and projects. Meetings are a fact of life, often complained about, but also often tolerated. And one of my favorite aspects of Agile approaches is a relentless focus on reducing waste, learning from experience, and just trying to get incrementally better. And I believe meetings are one of those areas we can get tangibly better at. And by doing so, it's a win for everyone involved. Rich Maltzman joined us back in episode 327 to talk about sustainable project management. He joins us again today, along with his co-author and project management expert, Jim Stewart. Rich and Jim have put extensive time into thinking about how to help us craft better meetings, and they've captured their ideas in a new book entitled Great Meetings Build Great Teams, a guide for project leaders and agilists. In today's discussion, you'll learn what Jim and Rich call meeting goblins and how to recognize and deal with them. The guys will share insights on how to make daily stand-ups more effective and how to run meetings when you're working cross-culturally. And before we're done, it'll be clear this isn't just about running better meetings. It's about building great teams. It's a fun discussion you're going to find helpful. Hey, before we start, here's a quick question. Do you know someone who's in college or maybe recently graduated? Some people at that stage know exactly what they want to do with their career, but I continue to see a growing number of people who just dread being asked the question, so what's your plan? Because when it comes to their career, they have no freaking idea. And I bring this up because we have a new course entitled just that, No Freaking Idea, How to Navigate Career Uncertainty. It's a career guide for people of any age who are struggling with uncertainty about what they want to do, and the feedback in the course has been great. So whether it's you that's wondering about next steps in your career, or a son or daughter that could use some perspective, learn more by going to nofreakingidea.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Thanks. Well, let's jump into today's discussion with Rich and Jim about their newest book, Great Meetings Build Great Teams. Hey guys, thanks for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks, Andy.
Great to be here.
Hey, so the quote, "I love meetings," is a refrain we don't hear that refrain very often. In fact, to the contrary, there are books out there called Meetings Suck, and a famous economist saying that people who enjoy meetings should not be in charge of anything. So Jim, let's start with you. What are some of the top reasons why people just don't like meetings?
Before I answer that, I may want to read your book. I'll figure out what I want to do with my life.
Right.
Because inherently, I think there's something, in the world of Agile, we talk about value producing things and non-value producing. I think meetings feel non-value producing to people, like, oh, another meeting. We're going to sit and somebody's going to drone on and everybody else is going to look at their laptop. And that happens, and especially virtually. And I think that's because, as I worked at one place where the guy would say, "What's the business purpose for this meeting?" It would annoy me until I realized he was absolutely right. Why did he need to be at a meeting? So you need to have a reason for the meeting, not just because you want to have a meeting because it's a good idea or whatever, but because it will have a decision. Some agenda will be discussed. Facts will be revealed, whatever the reason might be. And then you need a person who knows how to run a meeting. And this is what our book is about. And how do people run meetings? So they hate them because, for all the reasons I said, they don't know why they're there. They feel like they go to too many meetings. Richard covered some data that shows that back-to-back meetings actually drain your brain. And for all these, it just becomes this laborious thing that feels like I'm spending all my day in meetings, not getting anything done. And one other point on that's interesting is that as a long-time waterfall guy, I got into Agile about 10 years ago. And Agile, of course, is a solution to everybody's problem. Now half the guys on LinkedIn are saying Agile sucks, but okay, a different story. When I did Agile transformation last year, I was coaching people to be better Agilists. What I found out is they also couldn't run meetings. So they could have a sprint review and they'd have a daily stand-up, but they still went overtime, et cetera. There's two parts to that. And part one, to answer your question, the short term is if people don't know why they're there and secondly, because they're not well run. And when they come out, they don't come out and say, I accomplished something. That's a half hour of my life I'll never get back.
Right.
So that's the short answer.
No, I think that's right. I think you're right. That your point about this is going to be an hour or a half hour, whatever of my life I'm not going to get back. It's viewed as not value producing. So which is
Right.
why your book is so important, because it's going to help do that. And one of the many helpful ideas in the book is this notion of having meeting goblins. So
Right.
Rich, how do you like to describe, Rich, what a meeting goblin is, or what they are, why you pick that term? And then I'd love it if both of you would give us some examples and what they mean and how you deal with them. So Rich, let's start with you.
Sure. So goblins really are personalities that emerge from meeting attendees. And even on our book cover, which if you're listening real carefully, you can see, the book cover has a top view of a meeting with individuals that have shadows cast behind them. And the shadow doesn't match the person. The shadow is kind of a warlike, aggressive, assertive person. And really, goblins are personalities that come out during meetings, just like it might come out. And I'm not saying that Andy does this or that Jim does this or that any particular listener does this. But if you're in a car and someone cuts you off or drives like an idiot or doesn't indicate that they're turning left, or even worse, indicates they're turning left and goes right, you might have some choice words, expressions, and language for that person that normally you wouldn't use. Same kinds of things come out in meetings, and that's what we call a goblin personality. So these emerge during meetings, and it's up to the meeting facilitator to help understand that is happening and what to do about it. We have, I think, 9 different types that we can talk about. I'll mention a couple. If you want, I can start.
That'd be great. Thanks.
I'll start, so you know that you are not exhibiting Nadia the naysayer behavior, because he would have said, no, Rich, don't do that. So Nadia the naysayer is the person who's always finding something wrong, about to be wrong, or reminding us all of something that went horribly wrong in the last project, bringing everyone womp, womp, womp right down. What's driving this behavior from our experience, and we have a lot of it, is risk aversion. It's wanting the floor. It's wanting to be the one who can always say, I told you so. We used to say in our company, the naysayers are always eventually right. Right. So I worked in a large 2 million square foot factory that was there since 1956. And there was one guy named Walter who was always saying, this place is going to be some kind of warehouse someday. Well, 40 years later, he was right. It is now an Amazon warehouse. But for 40 years, it was a thriving 10,000 person factory, right? So the risk aversion is what's driving this. In our book, we give advice, specific bulleted advice about what to do on each of these goblin behaviors. And so for Nadia the naysayer, here's some specific examples. Challenge them. Say, hey, what's good about this project? Turn it around. Can you name 3 good things about this project? And that could backfire, but likely they'll still have to flip their mind around. And then probably the most important thing you can do is ask them to lead or be the chief contributor to the next risk identification meeting. Because what they're doing when they're saying, that'll work, that won't happen, this can go wrong, is what they're doing is identifying threats. And as a project manager of any ilk, I use the word ilk, you really want to be very good at identifying threats and opportunities, but Nadia will never identify opportunities. So that's Nadia. I have a couple others in my pocket, but I think I'll defer to Jim to pick one other one and talk about it, and I'll come back.
Yeah. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, and I just want to mention that whenever you get Rich and I, you will get a fair smattering of dad humor. So, for example, a fellow dad told me one, a very quick one, which was, did you hear about the guy that evaporated?
He'll be missed.
He will be missed.
Right. I like it. I'll be sharing that one later today with my kids. Yes.
Let's talk about, first of all, let's make sure we get a bit of a disclaimer here. There are some situations where the goblins are such that there's very little you can do. For example, the goblin is 2 or 3 levels above you. So it's some exec VP and he's a jerk or whatever, she's a jerk. maybe at best you can talk to your sponsor or your boss. So these techniques may not work as easily, or you're in some small run family organization, you're working for the daughter-in-law or whatever. So those are different. Let me talk about one of the really tougher ones, the bully. Billy the bully, we call him. They might be bullying you or another attendee if you're the facilitator. Not bullying in the schoolyard sense, but they're sort of aggressive and tough and intimidating. And let's talk about ways of dealing with Billy. You can stop the meeting, have a one-on-one with him. Say, hey, folks, we're going to take a break. You don't have to make it obvious you're out in the hall with him, but you're going out in the hall with him. It's like the teacher, right? And express to him it's coming across negatively, how it is. And he might say something like, I'm using he generically, he or she, but he might, I've got a lot in my mind and, whatever. Maybe that's the case. People bring the outside world in with them. This is what I shouldn't say learned, but relearned as a coach is where are people coming from? You might feel bubbly and full of love or whatever, but that person might not feel like that. So you can also call the person out publicly if you have to in the meeting and say, this is intolerable. And worst case is you remove them from the situation. Now, again, you're not going to remove the exec VP unless you really got big ones or something, or you might not replace the daughter-in-law or whatever it might be. But you can say, I have to remove from the meeting. We're not going to be there. It will cause some amount of kerfuffle in the team, but people will feel relieved. And he may come after you later in terms of through his boss. But I mean, I think the thing here that's really hard for project managers to remember sometimes is it's about the project, not about personalities. And if you don't deal with Billy the bully or Nadia the naysayer or whomever, your boss will come back to you and say, I'm hearing problems about your meeting. So either deal with it or don't deal with it. We recommend dealing with it, and you'll at least get a certain amount of respect. And maybe the next time Billy shows up, if he comes back to your meeting, he might behave himself. So you have to deal with the behavior as it occurs. I think that's the feeling. But Rich came up with the concept of goblins, and I think it's a good one because going into a meeting thinking that it's all kumbaya it doesn't happen.
Yeah, you're gonna get blindsided.
Yeah.
I can think of a meeting. I'm not sure if this would have been Nadia or if it would have been Billy, but it was a leadership session with a group of senior flight attendants, and I just remember this guy off on my left, and he was just like kind of Nadian, but it kind of spilled over to a little bit of Billy. I think they're cousins, Billy and Nadia.
Oh, the goblins are related. The goblins all come from one big family.
Yeah. That's what I figured.
Let me talk about one other one. If and I'm not going to be reticent here because this is about Rosie the reticent. And I think this one is important from an ethical perspective. So Rosie the reticent is, and you've had people like this, I think, at your meeting. They're overly shy, introverted, and silent. They don't speak up when they should. There's something really important, like, for example, take the Volkswagen Dieselgate example, where someone could have spoken up and said, we're cheating the EPA here, but if we ever get found out, it's going to cause a major crash in our stock. And, oh, by the way, we're probably killing about 60 people a year with these poisons. But no one felt empowered to step up. So we advocate devil's advocacy. And we also think about getting to the root of the behavior. What's causing this person not to speak up? Now, with global teams, a lot of this could be because people have English as a second language, and they're just shy about using their spoken English. So a couple of things you can do here. Make sure that these folks know their input is valued. Set ground rules. I mean, that's one of the key themes in the book. Set ground rules at the beginning of your sequence of meetings. This is how meetings will be run here. And then call on, this is a trick that I really like in our book. Call on them at the meeting, but don't do it blindly or unexpectedly. Do it after having a pre-conversation with them. So you talk to them before the meeting and you say, Rosie, we really want to hear, we really need to hear. And I know you have some opinions and it's much better if it comes right from you. This is a psychologically safe place. What's in the meeting stays in the meeting, but we need to discuss your issue. I would like you to bring it up. And now it's shifted. They're expected to speak, right? And they could even practice the terms and the English and rehearse it a little bit so that they know they're not only requested to speak, but they have a safe floor on which to present their issues. So
that's great.
I felt obligated and not unreticent to talk about Rosie the Reticent, because as a project manager, you need to enable those, for lack of a better word, it's not the greatest word, whistleblowers, that something is wrong here.
Yeah.
Right. So Rosie the Reticent is a cousin of Nadia the Naysayer. She's just the quiet version.
Well, and I mean, it's great advice you have about trying to make it safe, because that could be the reason why Rosie is not speaking up. It also could be Rosie, and maybe you have a different goblin for this, would normally speak up, but the way I reacted, I was being maybe Nadia or Billy. I shut her down, and then all of a sudden Rosie doesn't want to speak up anymore. So the reason why Rosie's reticent, it could be me, right?
Exactly.
By the way, there are things like the Delphi technique, right, where you can anonymously take bias out. So you go off and you do that anonymously and separate that out if the person is the bully or the person is the know-it-all or whatever. So there's more than just addressing it directly. These are well-known. We didn't invent these people or people at all or psychology. We're not psychologists. So, we just try to deal with the facts before us, but there are techniques to separate the people from the emotion. You're just trying to get down to what's really going on in the room. But part of what I've learned as being a coach is, as I became an Agile coach, it's so much more about just people than it is about process, and it is about the project. And one of the books I read, that Lisa Adkins wrote the book called Coaching Agile Teams. She's our sort of hero. I actually met her online, and she says, I think it was her that said, know what happened in the room before you got there. So, I'm taking it beyond just meeting, but a meeting can be started. You join in, you can be a member of the meeting. What's going on in the room? Read the room. I think it's an important thing to do.
I think we're going to. I think we're going to talk about AI later. But this is one of the. I mean, what you're hearing in this conversation right now, what Jim just said, know what's happening before the meeting. This is what AI cannot do, and this is why, at least Jim and I believe, are amongst many others, coaching project managers to just be more human. That's the way to fight AI. Not that we even should fight it, but when we admit it into our lives to help us, we have to realize its limitations, and our non-limitations are our advantages as humans. And one of them is, not necessarily writing Gantt charts and doing risk registers. Our advantage is that we can read the betters of us can read the room. We know what went on before the meeting, and AI literally has no clue about that. So this is where you should strengthen yourself, in our opinion.
Yeah, so I got to say, if there's anything that good came out of COVID, and we have to really, scratch our head on that one, but if there is anything good, it's the collaborative tools just got a lot better. So, Jim, what are some of the biggest mistakes people make with virtual meetings? And then any favorite pieces of advice for people who have to lead these virtual meetings?
Yeah. So going back to that, is when Rich and I first wrote our previous book, and we had a guy named Wayne Termel write that chapter on virtual for us because he was doing that stuff. We didn't really have a lot about collaborative tools. Even Zoom wasn't where it is today. So cut forward, we have Zoom. We have things like Miro you may be familiar with, or are you?
Yeah. Use it every week.
Mural, you can do stickies, the whole bit. You can truly collaborate. So we have that. And I think, I'll answer your question in a second on that, we're beyond the point of, oh, isn't this interesting and cute? Looks like the Brady Bunch. We're beyond that point as well, too. So I think when I run a virtual meeting, people have different philosophies about this, but I'm not really a fan of saying, oh, please come on the camera. It's like it bothers them that people aren't on the camera. If you want to come on the camera, come on. Some people don't. They prefer just not to be on camera. They want looking at themselves, although they could turn that off. But they don't want to be seen for whatever reason. To respect that, I might say something like, can they come on camera when you ask a question? But if they don't want to, I don't want to make them even more uncomfortable. Whatever gain I have from asking to come on camera is lost by the negativity of that. That's number one. Number two is, when you are on camera, watch out for Zoom fatigue, which is a real thing. We have a whole thing about that, and you can Google that. Zoom fatigue is a real thing that makes people feel uncomfortable at the end of the day. So be cognizant of how much time you're on. I mean, most of my meetings are half an hour, the ones that I attend. Hopefully people aren't going back to back. So be cognizant of that and try to keep people engaged. How do you make sure that people aren't shopping at Amazon at the same time? So breakout rooms work really well. There's nothing new about breakout rooms. The only thing is that people aren't as lost in breakout rooms as we used to be in older technology. So you can get rid of breakout rooms, design. Rich and I have done this for a while because we both teach as well. And we both taught many virtual classes. There was one time I was teaching for 2 customers at once, back-to-back PMP. which was all virtual. So we're always thinking about how do we keep people engaged? This is well before the pandemic and whatnot.
Yeah.
So you have to find a way to do exercises to keep people engaged, get them thinking. Even if it's a classroom situation, that if you're talking, as soon as you put people in a group and they start working, you've seen this. All of a sudden, they're interested. So get them into things, get them working on stuff, make it provocative, make it interesting so that people don't say, oh, this is going to be dull, but make it so there's some real discussion. And you can also start with icebreakers, fun icebreakers and whatnot. How was your day? Different conversations, everything up to what Rich has a game called Human Bingo, where people figure out, I speak a foreign language, or maybe I play guitar in a rock band or something like that, or whatever it might. I can't imagine that. So all these various things that people might do. So I think it's a matter of, it's almost like you're an entertainer.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're an entertainer, even though you're running a meeting. How can I keep people entertained? An entertainer can go out on stage and flop if it isn't consistently funny, interesting, entertaining. There's always a flow of something coming from the guy or gal, right? There's no dead spots. So I think it's a matter of keeping people engaged, board things, discussions, and don't overdo it, though. That every meeting they come to, they're going to break into a thing, and they're going to talk about their lives. Vary it somewhat, keep it that way. I think those are the best things you can do, but be cognizant of the fact that you're virtual. And to Rich's point about AI, virtual will always be inferior to in-person. Not seeing the entire body language, making the feel of the room. You work around that. Those are my thoughts about it.
Yeah, that's good. Rich, do you have a favorite, technique or thing you try to do what Jim talked about of keeping people engaged or keeping these virtual meetings interesting?
Yeah, well, it starts with connection before context. So before you start right into the meeting, make sure you have a little bit of social interaction. The human bingo is one idea to do this. Another thing that we do at kickoff meetings, or we used to do at kickoff meetings, I still encourage people to do, especially where there's a lot of people in the room that have some experience. Go around the room and just ask everyone, how much connected with this project experience do you have? And you write down 10, 5, 1, 15. You add that up, you'll find you have 300 years plus of experience in the room. You say, folks, there's 3 centuries of experience in this room. And
cool.
People kind of get amazed about themselves, and they get a little bit of a feel for how much experience. So again, it's another attempt at connection before context. Don't jump right in and say, okay, when does installation start?
Right.
Yeah, I like that. It's not as transactional. And Jim, you kind of talked about that before, also about it's just the human aspect of this. We can never miss that. And I feel like Jim, you mentioned you've been doing agile approaches for a while now, and teams, whether it's a pure Scrum or pure any approach, a lot of times there's some hybrid version where they're like, we're doing stand-ups more, or scrums, or huddles, and their goal, transparency, collaboration, communication. What do you like about those, Jim? And as whether you personally or the teams you've been coaching, and maybe some warnings we should know about? Let's start with Jim, then we'll go to Rich.
You mean specifically this type of ceremonies running Agile? What do I like about those?
Yeah. Because it's another form of meeting, right? So what? Maybe some warnings to watch out for, or things that you like about them.
So I'll start with the sun coming in here. I know that everybody can't see me, but you can. So it comes in this time of day. What I like about the Agile meeting, and by the way, I'm still very much a waterfall guy too. I go back and forth. What I like is the daily stand-up is good because when I was in a team of coaches, so when I was working at the pharmaceutical, there were 3 coaches, and we were a team of coaches to the larger organization, product, et cetera. But I volunteered to be the scrum master for our team of coaches. We did everything by the book. We had a daily stand-up. We had a weekly sprint review. We had a weekly retrospective. Everything that you could, we had a 1-week sprint. We were doing it completely by the book. What I liked about the daily stand-up is it works as promised. You meet every day. It sounds awful. When I first heard about it, meet every day, come on.
More meetings.
Then you look forward to it because you know that in a day, how badly can things go?
Right.
Maybe the day before the pandemic was one thing and the day after, but that's kind of rare. So you say, and then you come to your second stand-up Tuesday or whatever, and you say, you have your board, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? What impediments do you have? roughly that framework. We do 15 minutes of that. We'd get better at that. The second 15 minutes, which was not in the book, but we would use that. And I'd say, what's the highest priority thing that we just discussed we can do something about? And you felt like you were jumping right on problems. And the French woman that we had that was involved in this would say, hey, a product owner just won't play, which is not unusual. We talk about strategize, what we can do to bring the product owner on board. You had a chance every day. It wasn't a gripe session. It was a chance every day to fix something. Every time you did a sprint review, it was a chance to review something. Every retrospective was a chance to make things better, continuous improvement. So if done right, I love it about that. I think the downside is, especially with retrospectives, sometimes people don't want to look back. They may think it as a finger-pointing exercise, or they're reticent to want to try to improve for reasons that escape me. I was just talking this morning to a guy for a position I might have been going into for a coaching role, and he was talking about, weirdly, the reluctance of the software developers to even use Agile. I said, everybody uses it. He said, yeah, but developers are all lone wolves. They could do their own thing. They're cowboys. So, I mean, there's always, you got to figure out your level that people are at. So in the pharma, they were meeting once a week. I'll pick out one of the teams who was very good at it, became very good at it, product owner up in Canada and a scrum master here in the States. But every once a week was their daily stand-up or retrospective or whatever. They're going to pack it into that. So you have to learn how to compromise that. And I think the downside of that is to try to shove too many things, 10 pounds in that 5-pound bag. Right. So there's pros and cons, but I think done well, as somebody who's done these ceremonies for a while, I think they had tremendous value, especially because your continuous improvement and because it involves another case in point was when we told some of our, in a previous life, product owners, they had a meeting with us all the time. What do you mean? Then they were like, wow, by talking to the developers all the time, I'm really on top of my product.
Yeah.
So the downside is more meetings. The upside is more productive meetings and maybe less rework and waste down the line. So it's tough to convince people that they can't see it until they see it actually happen. Once they see it in action, they like it. But as a guy who preaches, don't have too many meetings or don't have too many non-productive meetings, and I'm asking you to have more meetings, it's a fine line to walk.
Yeah, I like it. I like how you explain it, because you're not just saying do it for the sake of doing it because that's what the book says, but
right.
Rich, my experience on this is sometimes what happens is that 15 minutes creeps into 20, which creeps into a half hour, which creeps into a discussion about World Cup or some current events or things like that, and all of a sudden that stand up, people are like, "Oh my goodness, when is this?"
Right.
I don't care about football or whatever.
There's no seats.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's no seats. Yeah. Somebody told me that I saw it was like a meme or said, instead of the daily stand up, turn it into a plank. So everyone has to do the plank, and then that'll keep them really short. So, anyways, it was funnier in a picture. But I don't know, Rich. Any other things that are warnings?
This is about stand-up meetings, which are supposed to be short, so I'll keep mine short. What I like about them, they're face-to-face, they're synchronous, they're short and to the point, and they're frequent. So the gap between communication in the team is small, and even a really poorly executed stand-up meeting that goes into the World Cup can be healed quickly. And by the way, if the scrum master is Jim or someone else who's well trained, there won't be any poorly executed stand-ups.
Yeah.
However, even with that, bear something interesting in mind. There were 3 coaches on that team. I've been doing it for 10 years, more or less. The woman had been doing it for like 8, and the product owner had been doing it for even more than either one of us. It took the 3 of us a bit of time to gel as a team. And especially since the product owner, God love him, really like to talk. He's one of the guys that didn't know how to end a sentence. He had to always interrupt them. Right. So as Scrum Master, our first day stamps are going 15, 20, 25 minutes. First retrospective, second retrospective, they're going too long. So we said, if you guys agree, I think you agree. I don't want to use the word ruthless, but I'm going to be a timekeeper here. And we went from 25 minutes to 20 minutes to 8-minute stand-ups. The price you pay a little bit is you haven't seen the woman from France in a month over the holidays, and as soon as you get on to it, okay, to Rich's point, what's the next thing we're going to discuss? At least spend a little time at the cost of how's it going, and then move into that. So it takes a while for each team. If I went into a team tomorrow and had to coach, and they were doing half-hour World Cup meetings, I couldn't say, hey guys, you're screwing this up.
Right.
I have to bring it to a retrospective and let them realize they're doing it. You coach them. You don't tell them. I don't get, if you want to do 45-minute stand-ups, knock yourself out. But here's the downside of it. I can't, that's a big difference people don't get between Agile and project management. When the project manager, I say, guys, this is the meeting. I'm a coach. I can make suggestions, point out the obvious. It's up to the team to figure out whether that's working or how well it's working.
Yeah, that's a lot of wisdom gained over the years. That's good. Rich, many of our listeners lead meetings across national or regional cultures. And what are some things that maybe our listeners ought to keep in mind to ensure meetings are effective, especially when our goal is not just better meetings, but also great teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, consider that there's two main divisions of culture. There's national and regional culture. So where you're from, how you were raised, and then there's organizational culture, right? So sure, someone from Peru is going to be very different and a different background from someone from Chicago. They would tend to. And you can learn about this from the country comparison tool that Geert Hofstede and his son now run. It's an excellent tool. You should put that in the show notes, I think. But there are also significant cultural differences between, for example, the sales team and the marketing team. Or even between the sales team and the marketing team and the engineering or development team. So you have to remember that these are tendencies and trends. You shouldn't stereotype and sweepingly say that everyone from Peru behaves in a certain way, but there are some tendencies. So some things to know about here, and this could be this can be and actually is several 3-hour classes at BU. But you can talk about regional and national culture in terms of high and low context. Those in low context cultures like the Netherlands are straight to the point. Your living room is ugly, where an American would say, interesting choices of colors, right? High context cultures, South American cultures in general tend to be storytellers. They won't say you're late to the meeting. They'll say, I know once this guy who was always late to meetings. So that's one way. And then another way is sorting people out. Of course, people have all these elements of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, right? So people who are describing everything, do you see what I mean? And are wildly gesturing, they're visual thinkers and visual expressors and visual learners. Whereas if you're a Star Wars fan, you know this expression, I have a bad feeling about this. These are kinesthetic people, right? They say that meeting didn't feel right. Something feels wrong about this meeting. You should understand where they're coming from so you can communicate with them on that channel. If you say to them, I don't see what you're saying, they'll say, of course you don't see what you're saying. You're not feeling what I'm feeling. And then, of course, there's another whole psychological area of study around social styles or Myers-Briggs. And it certainly can't hurt for you as a project manager to become conscious of and have a good vocabulary, at least in the area of Myers-Briggs typology or social styles. We talk about that a little bit in the book. But what's nice about these, Andy, is they're focused on the individual. Whether they're an engineer from Nepal or a designer from Peru or a software developer from West Chicago, they are a person, and it's best for you as a facilitator to know what might be behind some of their perhaps goblin-like behavior.
Yeah, it's so wise. I left to my own devices, I'll use a fair amount of slang that would make sense to most anyone in the U.S.
Yes.
and in many respects, many English-speaking countries, but not all.
Yeah.
And I was just a month ago, I was over in Europe teaching this group of people, and I don't know, we probably had at least 8 first languages represented in the room. And we were talking about the project charter, and we were talking about, high level description and high level requirements. And somebody raised their hand and go, what does altitude have to do with this?
High level.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Now, and we all had a good laugh out of it.
For communication to take place at all. And of course, meetings are a form of communication. There has to be some shared experience for the channel to even exist, to send a message. Right. And so the example I use in my classes, because I have a lot of students from China and countries that do not have baseball at all, is, a can of corn. Andy, do you know what a can of corn is in baseball?
Yeah. Ballpark cost wouldn't work, right?
Right. Right. Ballpark figure. Doing risk analysis is easy as a can of corn. Most Americans don't even know what that means.
Right.
And
These days,
you have to probably be American to know that that's an expression for an easily caught fly ball in baseball.
Right.
So you have to stay away from those, and it takes effort. And by the way, I think that's one of the things Jim and I say in the book. This does take thoughtfulness. It does take effort to do this right. Sorry, but you do it, or you end up with these meetings that suck, as the conversation started.
And in fact, that high level thing doesn't have to necessarily be, in your case, Andy, overseas. When I teach, as Rich knows, when we teach PMBOK, PMP, when you're working initiating, it's all high level. And the guy raised his hand and said, "You mean senior management?" So it wasn't right. But also on the cultural thing, it's funny that you mentioned that, because every time I have a work experience, I get to talk about it, right? So I had this French coach and American guy, product owner, and me. We'd be in the call, and the product owner / coach would use a lot of slang. Wasn't my place to tell him not to. It's what I did. We were on Teams, I believe. And every time I'd use something, I'd look up the term and I would text it over to this woman on Teams and say, "Well, here's what Bob meant." She would send me a smiley face. So almost I would say for the 6, we worked for almost a year. That year, she probably learned 20 or 30 new American slang terms, which wouldn't hurt her to know, working for an American company. Yeah. That I taught her, in a sense, because he was using those terms so much. I tried to avoid them because I learned the hard way. And we try to keep those Americanisms out of the book because they just do not translate well. And by the way, I don't know why I remember this, but if you recall, back to Rich's thing, he spent a couple of years overseas. I worked there, but not living there. When Robin Williams won an Oscar for Good Will Hunting, he said, "Boston, you're the can of corn." So I don't know what he meant by that, but I think it was kind of a good thing.
Yeah, right. But it's, I get a kick out of people who use like Cockney slang or whatever, and I'm like, what in the world does that mean? But it actually it will make things richer if we do share it. But then, like you're saying, like if we explain it and have a good discussion about it. But here's another subtle thing, just interesting what you guys think about that, is I think American names are generally kind of boring compared to the rest of the world. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Jim is not the most exciting name of
got Rich, Jim, and Andy, right? But in many countries, when they've got like 5 or 6 syllables, if we can actually learn how to pronounce the name, it's not only a respectful thing. It's interesting sometimes, just if it's a relatively new team, of, hey, tell me more. Is there a meaning behind that name? And they get to say it, because in a lot of parts of the world, there's meaning behind the name. And so just little things like that.
Before context.
Don't even get me started. Rich doesn't have any friends or colleagues who have what I would call normal names. Very unusual names. So he collects them somehow.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I love it. Yeah. And Rich, I really appreciate you going back to that connection before context, or context before, connection.
No, you had it first. Connection before context.
Right. Yeah. I think that is just wise in so many ways. Right. Let's say a listener realizes that their meetings likely have more people than necessary. And this is based off some real scenarios I've heard people say, because they value inclusion, right? We want people we want to socialize ideas. We want participatory decision making,
right?
But yet that feels like can get in the way, right? That it feels like the bigger the group gets, the more struggle we're going to have actually getting anything done. So there's this tension there between involving people and meeting effectiveness. So I'm interested if you guys have any recommendations for the listener that might be dealing with this situation. Rich, let's start with you.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to start with math. N times n minus 1 divided by 2. If you're exponential curve, as you add a new person, every time you add a person, you take the number of people times 1 less than that and divide it by 2. And it's a curve like you were showing, and your listeners are hearing. If they're listening carefully, they hear that curve. So here's what it starts with: ground rules. And this is a mantra in our book. Ground rules, ground rules, ground rules, right? Let your project team know that you intend to run really great meetings, and to do that, you're going to have the right people here. at the meeting, just the right people. So there are going to be times when you might not be invited, but it's okay because A, we're recording the meeting if that's true, and B, we're sending out meeting minutes if that's true. But a way around this also is to be flexible in terms of chunking your meeting into time chunks and say, okay, for the first 20 minutes, we're focused on, and I come from telecom, I can't help this. We're focused on installation, right? We're going to have the people who are most interested in installation as opposed to marketing or other functions. We will have the right people there and they can leave the room. That's right. You can actually escape the room and leave. And if we need you, we can call you back if the people are have proximity like that. So time chunking your meeting can be really a good way to deal with this. Everyone might want to be there for the meeting, but they can be there for the part of the meeting that is important to them. And then again, let them know that the meeting's notes are available so that they don't have to sit in to get the information. They can get it in a slightly asynchronous way. Over to Jim. Any comments?
Yep, sorry for the delay. Yes, I haven't had this problem as much because, to my earlier point, people don't want to come to meetings. So for example, at the Pharma, using that as my most recent example, and we talked about having more, even a daily stand-up. One person and took their monitor and turned it to me and said, "Do you see any time on that schedule?" So I think one of the ways to get around what I was thinking about when Richard asked this question is they had this concept about Agile, chickens and pigs. The joke about the pig being committed and whatnot. So they used to use it and they stopped using it. Who needs to be there? Who's committed? Who was supposed to hang out and see things? So one way I get around if I have that issue is to publish an agenda. And the agenda, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's what we're going to decide on, etc. And I might even, email that out and it goes to the people who are supposed to be there and CC the other people and kind of let them make that decision. I have found often as not, they might come once and say, okay, I know where this is going and whatnot. So I think there was one of your original questions that came up before, maybe in an email or something about an agenda. I think one thing about an agenda is, what are we going to talk about?
Yeah. And
in my personal experience, the people who don't need to be there won't come, or they might designate somebody to come. And then I found this to kind of sort itself out. It might have been true once upon a time that was a big issue, but people are just meeting out now. And if you clear them, they might pick up a phone or text you and say, "Do I need to be there?" Say, "You really don't." Or you can send Mary or whatever if you want. Oh, and by the way, you can look at our Kanban board, or I'll be publishing meeting minutes. You decide if you want to come later. It's about controlling that, I think. They don't want to find out there's something they should have been there for. So in recent memory, this hasn't been a problem for me. It's been the least of my problems. More of a problem getting to show the people who should be there to show up.
I wonder if it's maybe kind of like an organizational culture issue, because the person in particular thinking of this one is they said it just slows down all decision making. It's not even just meetings. It's all this. You need everyone's buy-in. And so I love this idea of rolling attendance that, hey, for the first 20 minutes, or hey, we'll call you back in when we hit something, and making it cool that people can either self-select of, hey, if you feel like you don't need to be here, you have permission to get up and go. There's total psychological safety around it. You're not going to look like you're not being a team player or something like that.
Right. And again, the ground rules would be set up so that at the beginning of the meeting, we say there may be people entering and leaving the meeting. That's the way we've designed this. So people aren't murmuring to themselves, Andy's running another crummy meeting. There are people leaving again. Right. Yeah. So it's the expectations. You set the expectations early on.
Big deal for stakeholders.
That's it.
And by the way, the decision thing, and I'm just pointing back at Agile again for two reasons. One is because one of the things about Agile is you push the decision down to the team. But I was also recently on about a month ago, if that, on a webinar with JJ and Jeff Sutherland from Scrum Inc. Jeff is one of the founders, and son JJ is a CEO or something. And Jeff said that decision latency is one of the biggest problems in failure of projects. That didn't stun me, but it surprised me a little bit, that decision latency. So you might say to somebody, we're making some decisions, or decisions we made, you need to be there. But we like to push that down so we don't lose a lot of time waiting for the big boys and girls to make that decision. So it's a fine line. But again, I'm seeing it less and less that people. I just want to get the people that need to be there. It's a bigger problem. The other people who always have plenty to do.
And this is an idea. I appreciate you mentioning it. This is an idea I'm not seeing a lot, but we had a guest on within the last year and a half who said at his meetings, what they're doing is you record. So you can be in the back of an Uber or you could be commuting on a train. You give your update recorded. It's uploaded to some sort of team repository, and people can get the updates instead of having to wait for the meeting to go around. You get it that way.
Sure.
Sometimes I forget if that's async or sync, but regardless, you get it when you need it, as opposed to using that meantime. So I think there's probably some techniques that we could tap into with technology to help us with that too.
Yeah, I think so. And even people who don't come to meeting, one of the things about meetings that I found when I was doing the Agile one was these two women that were running it were always saying, keep running over. Yeah. And I would observe the meeting. I said, guys, could you start late? You wait. Everybody shows up 15 minutes later. You schmooze for a while. I said, start the process of starting more or less on time, 8:02, because it was 8 o'clock in the morning. Start. People know the time. They'll show up eventually. And you have cards on your Kanban board. You're going to write down effectively what are meeting minutes in a sense of the update of the cards. The Scrum Master will do that. So they'll know they won't have missed anything, and they can figure out, I should be the next one to tie it back to your other thing. And when we get into AI, to talk about that, there's ways to record that as well. So there's fewer and fewer excuses for either not being at the meeting you should be at or not knowing what went on. Because I don't know what happened to that meeting. Somebody recorded something, as you mentioned. AI could recorded it. It's on the cards. We sent meeting minutes out. Run out of ways for you to say you don't know what's going on in the meeting.
Yeah. Well, let's actually build on that since you've mentioned AI. I found that some organizations are hesitant to try it because they don't know where that data is going, and if that will be leaked sometime. But I know there are people that are using it for like meeting summaries or minutes. What are you seeing, Jim?
Interestingly, my first experience with that was a thing called Otter.ai, which records. I don't know how it happened. It recorded accidentally. I didn't have it, and the guy I was talking to didn't have it, but it recorded everything, and we pulled it back down. But the other one was just that AI technology has been added to Zoom. You may or may not know that, and so it popped up in a month plus ago. So I haven't used it a lot in the business world because it didn't get to that point yet. Mm-hmm. Rich and I used it recently. So Rich and I met to talk about our book and the meetings we're doing and stuff. And I said, do you mind if I record this? He said, let's see what happens. Yeah. We recorded it. In the first part of our meeting, our icebreaker is we play music trivia. Rich tries to win, but unfortunately he often falls short. But that's a completely different story. So first we play music trivia. Then we discuss where we're going to discuss. And after that, we had a discussion about world affairs. So we're on the phone for like 45 minutes of the Zoom. And it came back and it said it gave us the summary. The summary, weirdly, only included the business stuff. It eliminated the music conversation, eliminated the world affairs conversation, and it accurately summarized our business discussion, although the transcript was somewhat of a mess. Transcript would have been meaningless, but the summary was there. That's been my main thing. I'll be honest with you. I do look things up. But let me give you another example that I'll jump on Rich's toes here a little bit. Rich invited me to Boston. I'm a Boston University grad myself, and he invited me to host a session there not too long ago. And I went to a session that two professors gave on using AI. So here was a real world thing, and you're probably as familiar with this as I am to a certain extent. The professors had this simulation where they were going to plan a student party of some sort. And they put it into ChatGPT. They've done this before the session. And they wanted a couple of options for a student party, some beer bash and this and that type of a thing. And they wanted to know the various costs, and they gave them a table, and they gave them a weighted table for one versus the other, and they gave them a charter, and they spit out all this cool stuff. And they were all very impressed with the type of work that it could do. You had to tweak them, but they would work. The downside of it was it gave you, I don't know how comfortable or familiar you are with earned value, but it gave earned value numbers, and they were wrong. So the bottom line was use it, but vet it, because what it spits out, you got to read everything. You can't just, to me, it's just like Excel.
Yeah.
If I take Excel and say I have $10 million and I had $10 million, I now have $20 million. But if it really meant I have 10,000, something in Excel will do that. We'll say, did you really mean to say 10,000? So we'll take you at face value. The one other thing about AI that's interesting, I like to test chat GPT. There's a story you may or may not know. There was a great molasses flood in Boston 100 years ago. A tank burst and it covered, and they were using the molasses to make munitions. I didn't know you could do this. They convert the molasses to industrial alcohol and take that to make munitions for the war. So I have no idea what the connection was. I went on ChatGPT and said, how was that done? And said, I can't answer that. I said, I'm not trying to find out how to do it. I can't answer that. I said, I'm trying to find out on a high level. I said, now I'm getting angry at the thing. I can go
flagged as a terrorist.
I'll finish by saying I use ChatGPT an awful lot to ask dumb stuff about what my best color would be when I go out on the town, or what's the best place, how much does a Hawaiian vacation cost. I find it great just for everyday stuff.
Yeah, it's good for that.
Yeah.
So I have two things to say here. That one is I've seen some really good presentations on AI on project management. One is human in the loop. Have a human in the loop. That's really important. The other thing is I call AI the clumsy assistant. It can help you. Imagine a lab assistant, right? Walking around your lab, spilling things, mixing chemicals that should never be together, and making mistakes that could be dangerous. So you have to watch them. They're expert chemists, but they could make mistakes. Then the other thing is that when we did the AI simulation, when Jim and I tried this, it actually measured how much each person talked. Jim spoke most of the meeting, or Rich spoke most of the meeting.
It can't be true.
No, seriously, it does that.
Lies.
And so one of the things that actually goes back to our book, which is, by the way, we're talking about our book, in the Goblin area, there's one called Guo the Garrulous. And this is the person that just goes on and on at the meetings, likes the sound of his or her own voice. And you can now have a measurement on that. You can identify goblins, right? Or self-identify as, oops, I'm Guo the Goblin. Guo the Garrulous Goblin. So I like the idea that it actually tests that out.
Yeah. I imagine the clumsy assistant will only get better over time, but keeping the human in the loop is just so important. We one of our sessions, the main contact at the client played some music during a break, and the summary said, she recited poetry. Which is
romantic, I suppose.
Well, it was like a rap song, and so they recited poetry. So you can't take this stuff as is, but
exactly.
Well, I'm going to worry about AI when I hear the words. I say, open the pod bay door, Hal, and it says, I can't do that, Dave. So
sorry. I cannot tell you the status update, Jim.
Still haven't seen that movie, Jim. Still haven't seen it.
He has not seen 2001. Can you believe that?
I plan to see it by 2001, though.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or you're probably like it's 1999.
Yeah. Let me wrap it up by saying I appreciate your book. I mean, it's about running meetings for sure, but it's really about building great teams. So, what's the link between great meetings and great teams? Rich, what would you say?
I would say that a meeting is an event. It's not a wedding. It's not a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah. It's an event, though. It's an event at which you, the project manager, have a chance, especially if you're facilitating it, to show that you care about the project, that you care about the team, and very important areas, like I mentioned with Rosie the Reticent, important areas like psychological safety. You set the tone for how the team's going to behave in their work on the project. At all these touch points, these meetings are kind of touch points. So we advise that you be, and this is Jim's expression, I love it, large and in charge, and act somewhat as a servant leader. Those aren't necessarily in conflict with each other. And that you facilitate meetings. And that's what's going to help build your team throughout the life of the project.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Jim, what do you think? How would you draw the link between great meetings and great teams?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
Simply building on what Rich said, these meetings make people get to know each other better on the human level.
Mm.
Let me go back quickly to those we used to do these big 2-day meetings in Pharma that led to the first book. People came from all over the world. We go to Chicago. We were going, I won't say where, but in the Chicago area. Sometimes we go overseas. And people who had never met would come together to work on work breakdown structures. They'd work on presenting their part of the puzzle. They'd work on risk management. And they got to know each other. Not everybody's going to love each other, but they really had that face-to-face. Oh, Hans, meet Mary, whatever it might be. They go out at night and do that. And it really brought them together to work together. Working together has a magic, and especially working together as tactily as you can get. Now, we were doing stickies on a wall. That's fantastic stuff. We can do stickies on a sort of a wall with virtual. So I think the very act of working together in and of itself towards an end can bring people closer together as a team over and above all the going out and doing the outward bound team type of things. One might argue, one listen to this and say, yeah, but there's always that guy. Well, that guy shouldn't stay on that team. Shape up or ship out. Has to be recognized that the person isn't playing well with others. Because if we talk about the Tuckman model, norming, performing, storming, etc., you want to get to performing. And the thing that's preventing you from getting to performing is a person or persons. Then they have to either mold themselves to the group in a sense or leave the team. So I think the very act of the working together helps the meeting helps build the team, and then you can build on that outside of that with things that are the events and whatnot. So I think working together towards a common goal for something that's cool. As I saw, well, one thing I want to say about the farmers, too many people have an impression of farmer from what they see on 60 Minutes. Everybody on 60 Minutes is a bad guy. But the scientists working in pharma are good guys and good gals who are trying to make life better for all of us. They're not getting any glamour out of it, getting paid well. So, but you still have to pull them together as a team. They meet, they do things. They have a purpose. They have a cool thing that they make. So if people are invested in the cool thing they make and they meet, they'll gel as a team, and you can enforce that either as the PM, more as the PM than you can as the Scrum Master. So I think over and above what Rich said, the very act of holding the meetings and getting better at meetings and trusting and having the psychological space makes the better team. I've seen it over and over. It's not a fantasy or a wish. I've seen it over and over. Even just my 3-person Agile coach team, we didn't know each other. I think we love each other at the end, but we sure had a pretty damn good team.
Yeah, isn't it great? Like when you're on mission together and you're actually getting stuff done. It's not just talk,
Right.
And meetings help get things done. It's where the action really is. So, for those listening, if you'd like an insightful book about meetings and teams that you'll actually enjoy reading, get a copy of Rich and Jim's newest book, Great Meetings Build Great Teams. I put links to the book as well as Jim and Rich's LinkedIn profiles in the show notes for this cast. So, hey guys, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks, everybody.
Great to be here.